Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
Just as the sun was setting on a bright spring day, a car that goes up and down the steep hill from the bottom of Main Street to the zoo in Cincinnati started to go up with its load of precious people. The car was full of people, but not too crowded. Among them were some young people with happy faces, showing how joyful and free they felt. The world seemed like a wonderful, happy place to them. One young girl, who was sitting in the middle on one side of the car, caught everyone's attention. She was about 17 years old, with a slim and graceful body. She had a lovely face, happy blue eyes, and lots of curly golden hair that hung around her white forehead in pretty little rings. She was dressed in a nice tan brown outfit with darker brown trim. On her head, she wore a stylish brown straw hat with pink apple blossoms and a pretty brown ribbon. She had small bronze boots on her feet and long suede gloves on her hands. A small brown velvet bag with silver clasps hung at her side, and she had a fancy music roll made of Russian leather on her lap. Everything about her showed that she was a lucky and rich girl. Her beautiful eyes looked like clear pools of water reflecting the blue sky. Her lips were smiling, and there was no worry on her lovely face. Directly opposite her sat a young man who looked like he was not rich, although anyone who saw his noble face would want to look at him again. He was tall and strong, with broad shoulders and a big chest. He stood straight and had a big head held proudly on a well-shaped neck. He looked like the picture of manly beauty, strength, and health. His face was one that, once seen, could never be forgotten. It was serious and kind, yet his mouth had a determined look. Sometimes, a playful light would shine in his clear, dark brown eyes, showing that under his serious look, there was a quiet sense of humor and fun. His features were strong and even, his forehead was full and nicely shaped, his nose was curved, his mouth was firm, and his chin was big. It was a strong face, a good face, one to be trusted. The young man was about 23 or 24 years old, though his serious manner might make him seem older. He was wearing a very plain suit, which showed he was not rich. At his feet in a basket were a plane and saw, showing he was a carpenter. The pretty girl looked curiously and admiringly at the poor young man opposite her. He looked back at her respectfully. Her cheeks turned red, and she shyly lowered her eyes. When the car left the station and started going up the hill, no one knew about the terrible thing that was about to happen. The car was almost at the top, about to safely reach the station. But suddenly, something broke underneath. The car paused for a moment, scaring everyone. Then, it started moving backward, going faster and faster. The people inside realized they were heading towards a terrible crash. Everyone screamed and tried to get out, but the doors were locked. They were trapped inside with no way to escape. The beautiful girl cried out in horror, then suddenly became very calm, though her face turned very pale and her eyes filled with despair. She looked at the young man opposite her and saw that he was looking at her with worry, showing that he only cared about her safety, not his own. She reached out to him, and he stood up, calm and strong. His face was pale, but his eyes showed he would try to save her. "Do you trust me?" he asked her softly, holding her shaking hands. She gripped his hands tightly and looked at him desperately. "Yes, yes," she mouthed, though no sound came out. The car was moving very fast now, and there was no time to lose. The young man grabbed the straps above his head. "Quick now," he told her. "Stand up, put your arms around my neck, and hold on to me tightly." She looked up at him helplessly, unable to move. With a sad look out the window and a groan, he let go of the straps, grabbed her hands again, and put them behind his neck. "Hold on, hold on," he cried in a desperate voice. The tone woke her up. She found strength and held him tightly like a person drowning. He lifted her a few inches off the floor, grabbed the straps above, and pulled himself up, hoping to avoid some of the shock. He was just in time. The crash came with terrible screams and then silence. The car broke into thousands of pieces, burying 20 people underneath. A group of scared people had gathered at the base of the hill, watching the terrible crash. When it was over, kind people started to look for the victims. At first, it seemed like everyone had died. The brave young man was found under 2 bodies, holding the beautiful girl he tried to save. His other arm was crushed. "Brother and sister," someone said as they tried to separate them. The young man had only been knocked out. He opened his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling pain but alive. "Is she safe?" he asked, caring more about the girl than himself. They tried to lift her, but her hands were tightly locked behind his neck. "She is dead," someone said after checking her heart. "The shock killed her." "No, no," the young man cried. "Don't tell me she is dead. Who are you? Where do you live? Should we take you to the hospital or home?" they asked the young man. "Not the hospital, home to my mother," he said weakly. "Number, Hughes Street," he gasped before fainting. They thought the girl was his sister, so they took them both to Hughes Street. At the house, they found it belonged to Mrs. Richardson. She wasn't home, but they used a key from the young man's pocket to get inside. They put him on a bed and the girl on a couch in the parlor. Then, they called a doctor. Mrs. Richardson came back just as the doctor arrived. She found out her son was hurt in the accident, and a strange girl was also brought to her home. The doctor checked the girl first. "She is not dead," he said. "Her heart beats, her pulse is faint but regular, and she has no injuries." Women from the neighborhood helped care for her as the doctor went to see the young man. Mrs. Richardson was very worried, trying to help her son. "Wallace, how did you end up in that car?" she asked. "I can't tell you now," he replied. He then asked the doctor, "How is she?" "She is not injured. She will be fine unless she gets a fever from the shock," the doctor said. "Thank heaven," Wallace murmured, then fainted again. The doctor found that Wallace had 2 broken ribs and a broken arm. He treated his injuries, and though Wallace was weak, he was comfortable. The doctor then went back to check on the girl in the other room. "You will have a lot to do, Mrs. Richardson, with your son and this girl both sick," the doctor said. "You need a nurse to help you." "The girl is not my daughter. I don't know who she is," Mrs. Richardson replied, looking kindly at the young girl. "Not your child. Who can she be?" the doctor asked, surprised. They looked in her velvet bag, hoping to find her name or address, but found only some car tickets and money. Her music roll had only the initials VDH on its silver clasp. The girl woke up but was very weak. The doctor didn't ask her any questions. He checked on Wallace, then left, promising to return in a couple of hours. When he came back, Wallace was sleeping comfortably, but the young girl had a high fever and was delirious. "Should I take her to the hospital?" Dr. Norton asked Mrs. Richardson. "Taking care of both of them is too much for you, and her family might find her there soon." "I can't bear to let her go," Mrs. Richardson said with tears. "She is so young and delicate. I know she would get good care at the hospital, but I don't want to move her. Leave her here for a day or two, and if Wallace is comfortable, I can take care of her too." The doctor agreed, thinking that women like Mrs. Richardson were rare. 2 days later, this ad appeared in the Cincinnati newspapers. "Wanted, information about Miss Violet Draper Huntington, who left her home on Auburn Avenue on Tuesday to take a music lesson in the city. Her friends fear she might have been in the Main Street accident, but they have found no news of her in the morgue or hospitals." Dr. Morton read this ad on his way to visit his patients on Hugh Street. He remembered the initials on the girl's music roll, VDH. VDH, he said, thinking about the name Violet Draper Huntington in the ad. "That must be my patient. Her friends will come soon and help that poor, tired woman." He showed the ad to Mrs. Richardson, who agreed that the girl must be Miss Huntington. The girl was still very sick. She had a high fever and didn't know where she was. She kept calling out for Belle and Wilhelm to help her. "She is not getting better," the doctor said seriously, feeling her fast pulse. "Her fever is worse. I will go to Auburn Avenue and tell her family about her condition."